Hello, my name is Laura Zuber, and I would like to welcome all of you to today's webinar, Leverage Data-Driven Estimation to Manage Vendor Delivery. Before we get started, I would like to make you aware of a few technical items. All of you who are watching the presentation are currently on mute. To ask a question at any point during the presentation, just use the Q&A dialog at the right of the screen that you'll see in a moment. Keith will field as many of these questions as he has time for at the end of the presentation. If he does not have time to answer your question, don't worry. I will save all the questions that we don't get to and refer them to Keith so that he can get back to you. Let me introduce our speaker. Keith Siako has more than 30 years of experience working in sales and customer service, with 25 of those years spent with QSM. As Vice President, his primary responsibilities include supporting QSM clients with their estimation and measurement goals, managing business development and existing client relations. He has developed and directed the and he has developed and directed the implementation of the sales and customer retention process within QSM and has played a leading role in communicating the value of QSM tools and services to professionals in the software development, engineering, and IT industries. So take it away, Keith. Yes, I hear you.
I have
Go
no idea
ahead.
what happened.
Just
Sorry
go
about
ahead.
that.
We have an audience, so go
Okay.
ahead with your presentation. I'm glad you made it in.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Welcome. I appreciate everybody's patience, and I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today, and thanks, Laura, for the introduction. Vendor management is a popular topic these days with our clients, so we wanted to spend some time showing ways that we can help improve the process. We actually help our clients on both sides of the aisle, the proposal side as well as the vendor evaluation side. And a couple of the biggest things we see before we start working with people is a need to improve communication between the vendor and the client. And we often see a lack of data in the overall vendor management process. So today I'll be showing some ways that data-driven estimation and project control techniques can help. First, I just want to start by giving a brief background on QSM, Quantitative Software Management. In case you're joining us for the first time, you can see the screen up here. 46 years in business. Quantitative Software Management is our company name, and we're very well known for being the developers of the SLIM suite of tools. SLIM is actually an acronym for Software Lifecycle Management. And that was the given name when we first started. And of course, we've adapted to all types of IT and engineering development types of projects. So software as well as digital transformation, cloud migration, in-house programs, as well as vendor programs. In addition to being a leading product company, we're also a research provider. You're going to see some examples of that during the webinar today. And our main focus at QSM is helping our clients plan and negotiate both in-house as well as vendor project and portfolio delivery. It all starts with this QSM industry database. It's one of the largest in the world of its kind, and it's got over 14,000 projects, over 46 years of research, and it helps us with vendor management because it gives us the most recent information on cost and schedule and scope and quality on completed programs. So it helps us with the early decisions, and it helps us help our clients with the early decisions. You can actually see a scatter plot here, a subset of the QSM database along the trend lines there. So that's kind of a little snapshot for you. And we're going to go into more detail as we go on during the webinar. I'm going to start by just explaining our software production equation. This is the equation in its most simplest form. The software production equation was developed by Larry Putnam Sr. when QSM first started. He actually founded QSM and is actually very well known in our industry as a pioneer in the software estimation industry. In fact, we were implementing machine learning types of techniques even before they became popular. And so Larry was way ahead of his time, actually. What we're actually doing here is we're linking the delivered system size or functionality to the time and effort that it takes to deliver that work. And in addition to that, we're linking the level of productivity that it takes to achieve that delivery. And you're going to see during the webinar, we're going to refer to that measure as a productivity index. And it's calculated with historical data. So once we know the functionality delivered and the time and the effort that it took to deliver the work, we can calculate what that vendor's productivity index is. And then we can use that to both manage and measure the vendor actually during the evaluation bid process, as well as during the in-flight project delivery. And this equation can be rearranged to solve multiple estimation problems. So for example, if we only have very little minimal information going into the decision-making process, we can leverage this production equation to help us solve multiple solutions. Now, this productivity index, you're going to hear a lot about it as we go through the webinar. It's actually a macro measure for productivity and efficiency. It takes into account things like experience level of the people, the maturity of the process that the vendor is working in, whether it's a vendor project or an in-house project, the complexity of the work that they're delivering, and the overall efficiency and productivity at the project and release level. Now, on this particular view, we're just kind of highlighting here the type of historical data that we recommend to capture as part of the vendor management process. And what we recommend is, like the slide I just showed a second ago, we recommend that you capture size and scope or value delivered, the duration of the program, the effort spent, and that productivity measures, and the productivity measures that I mentioned a second ago. So again, once we know the functionality delivered, size and scope, and the duration and effort, we're going to be able to calculate that productivity index on the vendor program itself. And you can see on the scatter plot here, this is actually an example, that blue data point is actually an example of a vendor bid. And this is for duration. You can see duration on the horizontal axis there. And you can see a trend line, right? This would be our most recent, and actually this is an agile trend line, our most recent agile projects. So right off the bat, you can see that vendor bid and how it compares with the industry average to make sure it's competitive, to make sure you can make the right decision. And then also on the scatter plot, you can see the triangles. Those represent the historical data from the vendor if you were able to pull that together as part of the contract. Okay, so we're going to be able to compare the vendor bid to the trend line as well as the historical data from the vendor. And we can do all this even before any detailed planning takes place, right? So before we figure out how many hours each person's going to work and we try to roll that up in a spreadsheet, we're going to use the SLIM tools. I'm going to show you examples from the SLIM tools today. We're going to use the SLIM tools early to get the targets right, to make sure the vendor bids are realistic. And we're also going to be able to use the tools to compare vendor bids as well, early in the decision-making process, as well as in flight. This view here is called the impossible zone. You can see a little subset of the QSM database again. You can see a relationship here. You can see time and functionality delivered. So as the projects get bigger, they take longer, right? You can see that relationship there. You can see kind of a gradual slope in the data. And then you can see in big, bold red letters what we call the impossible zone. And this is the type of analysis we want to use as part of our vendor management process when we're evaluating multiple vendor bids. We want to make sure that, one vendor may come in and say, hey, it's going to cost $1 million and it's going to take 6 months. Another vendor may say 2 million, 8-9 months. So we want to be able to use the analytics from the QSM tools to decide which vendor is more competitive so we make the right decision. So we get those targets right early in the process. So we want to avoid the impossible zone. We want to avoid signing up to a schedule and a budget that's not realistic. And we wouldn't use this analysis as a baseball bat, right? We want to use it so everybody's on the same page, both the proposal side as well as the client side. Makes everything better for both sides. Vendor management challenges that we're going to talk about today. Number one, managing complex programs with multiple vendors. Okay, so how many times have you been in a situation where we've got multiple projects going on, multiple vendor bids, projects slip and they affect the start date of another project, things like that. So the more programs that we have and the more complex they are, the more we have to do a better job of capturing some data and doing a better job of estimating and planning. Okay, a data-driven approach hopefully is going to go a long way to help us with that. So trying to take some of the complexity out of the process, trying to manage that a little bit more effectively is one of the things we're going to focus on today. A lot of moving parts to deal with, especially when we're talking about digital transformation programs and cloud migrations and things like that. Number two, communication and collaboration across the enterprise, right? So not only do we want to help improve the vendor communication with the client, but we also want to improve the communication across the enterprise, across the stakeholders, so everybody's on the same page early. A lot of times when we're managing programs, people think differently. They think in terms of the size, the functionality that they deliver. They even define that differently. So we want to draw some bridges between vendor to client so everybody's talking the same language. Number three, inadequate planning and estimation methods. Of course, that hits at the heart of what we're going to talk about today. I mean, so many times we run into folks that are doing a very, very detailed level planning, right? How many hours is each person going to work? Before they know, and they try to roll that up, they try to guess at that, before they know, is this going to be a 6-month schedule or is this going to be a 12-month schedule? You know, what kind of budget are we actually working with? Do we have the capacity to fulfill the demand? And then number four, negotiating a fair price and reliable schedule. So many times, you know, both sides go in with the best intentions, but a lot of times, you know, vendors can tend to be overly optimistic, right? They want to win your business. And so they're trying to be competitive, but then sometimes it doesn't work out, right? They'll maybe a price is quoted too low, a schedule too aggressive, and then we find ourselves throwing more money at the problem, and then things get worse. So we want to be able to negotiate a fair price for both sides early in the process. Okay, benefits to using this data-driven estimation approach. And I'm going to show you some examples here in a minute. But number one benefit is we provide the ability to see the big picture, right? The forest, see the forest before the trees, right? Get out of the woods early, see what the targets should be before we commit to anything. So we want to have that ability. And that's especially value when we're dealing with vendor negotiations very early in the process. A lot of times we're working with vendors maybe that we haven't worked with before, or maybe we don't have a certain experience in a certain type of software development or delivery, or a cloud migration may be new to us. So being able to see the big picture early is a big benefit that we're going to talk about today. Number two, provide a technology knowledge base to help with the early cost and schedule decisions. Okay, that's that industry database that I mentioned. So QSM has that large industry database that we can pull typical cost and schedule numbers from to help us make good decisions early in the vendor management process. Number three, it improves negotiation and communication capabilities, not only on the project itself, but the stakeholders that care about it, right? Maybe senior management is involved early in the decision, but they're not quite as involved later on. We want to keep everybody on the same page, and we want to have a way to report to everybody what's going on. That way, if decisions have to happen in the middle of the project, we can make adjustments and everybody can feel comfortable going forward, because we want that vendor relationship to last. We want to be able to work with that vendor again and feel confident the next time, as well as on the current program. And the number four benefit is these types of tools and processes help manage uncertainty. I mean, there is a lot of risk early on in, for example, a digital transformation program, right? All the moving parts. We want to be able to take that uncertainty into account when we're making the decisions on the plans, as well as once the project gets started. So we want to be able to manage that uncertainty and take it into account when we're quoting a price, or when we're evaluating a vendor bid or making a decision. Okay, that's kind of a summary. I'm just going to, I'm going to actually show you some real life examples here using the SLIM suite of tools. So we have tools that our customers use, and also we have a consulting business that our consultants actually work very heavily in the vendor management arena. And so I'm going to show you examples today about how we've helped clients in the past and how we can help going forward. And before I do that, I just want to give a quick summary of just what the SLIM suite of tools is. That's where you're going to be seeing the examples from. Again, SLIM is software lifecycle management. It supports any type of IT or engineering development process. SLIM Estimate is kind of the flagship product. It's the one where you're going to be dealing with the bid evaluations, right? When we make those early decisions, what should this cost? How long should it take? What's the risk going to be? What are the trade-offs? Let's take a look at some industry benchmarks to make sure that this estimate's credible. And let's look at multiple scenarios so we feel comfortable going forward. So SLIM Estimate is used for that early estimate. Data Manager, history repository tool that comes with it. This will provide a vehicle for you to capture a little bit of historical data on your vendor. That way, the next time, for example, when we're measuring productivity, right? When that vendor gives you a bid today and they tell you the cost and the schedule and the scope, you're going to be able to calculate a productivity index. And so we want to be able to capture that data so the next time we can use the actuals to evaluate going forward. So the Data Manager is a tool that you're going to be able to capture some historical data. Master Plan is a tool where you're going to be able to estimate at the portfolio level. So those complex programs that I mentioned, when you have a lot of things going on at one time, a lot of moving parts, Master Plan is going to let us estimate that and also see things like, do we have the capacity to fulfill the demand? Things like that, estimating at the portfolio level. SLIM Control is for in-flight analysis. It's going to provide plans versus actuals. It's actually going to let you, it's almost like a GPS for your project delivery. It's going to let you see the map where you want to be and where you actually are now. And based on any changes, where you're going to be going forward. And then SLIM Metrics is for projects completed, and you want to see how that vendor did or that group of vendors did. Did they follow through on what they told you? And can we use them the next time? And then SLIM Collaborate is our software as a service. It's our estimation tool for the web. And so there you have it. That's kind of a little summary there. And before I continue with actual examples, I just want to pause for questions, just to make sure that, first of all, everybody can hear me. And also, if you have any questions before I jump into more detail.
Yeah, we have one question, Keith, and that is, you showed some charts with the trend lines, I think, on that. Where did the trend lines come from?
Great question. The trend lines actually come from the QSM database. So, and they come from, and where do we get the data is probably the next thing you're thinking. So all that data that we pulled together and all that research is from our client relationships by permission. So we capture, we update the database probably every 2 to 3 years based on how much information we have coming in. And we update the tools with that new information in the form of the updated statistical averages and trend lines. So those trend lines actually come from the industry database. Now, as a client, you could also create your own custom trend lines, and you could bring those into the estimation tool as well. But those trend lines actually are from the industry database so that we can sanity check when the cost and schedule commitments, sanity check to see if they're reasonable and, see if we're comfortable moving forward. So short answer is from the industry database.
Okay, thank you. And one more would be, I think you might have mentioned it, but can our tools support cloud migration?
Yes, absolutely. So we support fully any type of cloud migration. And in fact, I'm going to be showing some sizing examples today in general on vendor programs. But yes, absolutely, fully support cloud migration, digital transformation, any type of IT or engineering development process.
Okay, that's it for now.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. All right, so Laura, are you able to see the staffing profile?
Yes, you're fine.
Double checking. Great. Thank you. All right. So I'll show you a few examples here, and based on what I've talked about so far, you can see here, this is actually the SLIM estimate tool. This is where we would do those early decisions, right? What should this project cost? How long should it take? How many people will we need to deliver? Is the vendor bid reliable? Let's compare multiple vendor bids. Let's sanity check based on industry data, right? So those very early decisions. Now, if I go to the tools menu, you can see that I could access all the tools in the suite that I mentioned, right? And what we're actually looking at here, the way this architecture is set up, if I look to my left, I've got a navigator that's got a wealth of analytics that describe a vendor management bid so that we can communicate effectively with the stakeholders. And you could actually scroll down and see all of these. And I'm going to kind of summarize some of this up front. But these views actually describe an estimate that I've already run. And first thing I'll probably do is I'd probably load our historical data in. So if I'm able to capture some data from the vendor that I'm working with as part of the contract, I'm going to do that to help me make those decisions a little bit more reliable. So when I hit OK, what happens is it brings the historical data in to the estimating tool. And now you can see on the view here, you can see a trend line, kind of like that slide I showed in the PowerPoint presentation. You can see the industry average for this type of program, and this is for effort. I think the slide I showed was actually schedule or duration. This can be effort or cost. The triangles that you see are the historical projects that you've completed in the past, or projects that your vendor has completed in the past. That's even better. And then again, the trend line is the industry average. Now, the red data points that you see are actual vendor bids. Okay, there's two of them. You can see the one higher up on the scatter plot, and let me just explain this a little more. This is effort on the vertical, size on the horizontal, right? And we're using IUs for sizing. Or implementation units. That's a sizing measure that we're using in this example. But this could say story points, it could say features, it could say user stories, it could say epics. It's flexible, right? In this example, I'm using implementation units. And this is basically giving me two vendor bids that I'm comparing on the cost. And you can see one of the vendor bids is much more in line with our industry database, and it's also much more in line with our historical data. So the one up top here is less risky. The lower one that you see is a little bit outside the standard deviation. That's another vendor, right? Vendor A and vendor B. Vendor B is a little bit more risky. They're not allowing for, they actually have a lower price. They're bidding a lower price, probably a shorter schedule. Okay, so that's kind of a little snapshot there, example for it from two vendor bids that we're comparing on an estimate that I've already run. You can see here, I'm kind of showing the big picture first. I'm going to show you how we actually ran the estimates in a second. You can see here on the staffing profile, this is how the vendor is going to ramp up on the program. This is actually kind of a hybrid example. I'm going to show you some agile examples as well in a second. This is kind of a more traditional hybrid example. You can see the vendor is going to ramp up to about 8 people. You can see staffing on the vertical, right? This is a staffing profile. Then you can see on the bottom right our little summary of the bid. So you can see they're bidding 5.2 months, about 5,000 person hours of effort, about $500,000 in cost. So that's what they're quoting us with about 8 people. Okay. Now that's the riskier estimate. I can go up to this solution log with other estimates that I have loaded, and you can see the more risky bid as well. So now I'm highlighting the bid that was not quite as comfortable. You can see the shorter schedule and the lower cost, right? Compared to the more reasonable bid, which is the 7 months at $1.4 million. So this vendor actually buffered in additional time and effort for their bid. And you can see that even though the cheaper vendor obviously comes in lower, I might be more inclined to go with the more reasonable, the higher bid here, because it's more in line with our historical data, because I'm probably less likely to lose money in the long run. Now, how did I arrive at this estimate? Okay, now there's multiple approaches based on the information you have available. I'm going to go ahead and show what we call the bid evaluation example. By the way, let me take one step back. before I start using SLIM on an estimate, what I do is I would open up a template that represents the type of program I'm working on. So you can see I've opened up what we calling a bid evaluation template. And when I open up this particular template, it brings in all the information I need to make the right decisions on the vendor management bid process. Okay. Now, if I'm doing a cloud migration, somebody asked if we support cloud migrations, then I would open up a different template, right, that represents a cloud migration program. Okay. So in this example, I've opened up the bid evaluation template, and now I'm going to actually show you how I generated this estimate initially. Okay. So I came in here and I said, okay, open up the bid evaluation playback wizard, and it actually tells us, it actually steps us through the process. It actually tells us what we should know. And in this example, what we know is the project scope, because the vendor told us what they're going to deliver, or we've told the vendor what we want delivered. That's the scope. And what we also know is the time and budget available, because that's what the vendor's telling us. They're telling us that it's going to take a certain amount of time and they're going to price it out at a certain budget for us. So that's what we know going into this example. And then what we're going to calculate is that productivity index I mentioned. Remember earlier, I mentioned that productivity index. It's going to allow us to be more effective in our bid evaluation process, because it's going to let us see, it's going to let us measure the vendor. Okay. So it's going to calculate that productivity for the vendor, and we're going to be able to validate whether that scope is reasonable and whether that time and budget is competitive and reasonable. So what we're going to do first, we go next, we're going to actually put in the name of the project. We're going to put in the phases that we want to include in the estimate. We're going to put in the start date. You can see here I'm working on an e-commerce system. Then I'm going to actually choose a trend group. So you can see here, these are, remember I mentioned that QSM industry database, right? Thousands of projects. Well, and someone asked, how do we get the trend lines? We get it from the QSM database, and then you can see it here in our tools. So these are all different types of programs that we support, right? From all the way from engineering to real time to business to hybrid to agile. Anything you can think of is here. And when we click on the application domain that we're working in, what it does is it brings in the typical cost and schedule numbers for that particular type of program. Okay. So I've chosen Commerce Solutions, and now it's going to bring in and leverage the time and effort it takes on those types of programs. So now we're going to be able to use that. Even if I don't have any vendor history, I'm going to be able to use the QSM database to make decisions. Okay, then I'm going to say, now I'm going to actually put in the scope here. Now I can put it in, I can type it in as fixed, like I already know specifically what I want the vendor to deliver. Or if I'm not sure, I can use what we call a t-shirt sizing approach, or a rough order of magnitude approach. And we're going to say, is this big or small based on what we normally do? And here you can see the dial move there, implementation units. That's the sizing. Here we're using the industry database to come up with a size estimate for us, a typical size estimate for the type of project that we're asking the vendor to deliver for us. So it's going to help us generate a size estimate. Now, this can also be tailored specifically for you, how you define big, small, medium. Okay. But in this example, we're using the out-of-the-box solution. We're going to use the industry database for size for a medium-sized program, because that's what we're asking the vendor to do. And then I'm going to put in the vendor bid. I'm going to put in what they're quoting me. They're quoting me 7.3 months, and whatever budget they've decided to quote me, or team size, or whatever information I have available from the vendor bid, I'm going to go ahead and put it in here. And that's it, really. 4 steps, right? Name of the project, application type, size, and then the bid. And then I'm going to hit finish, and it's going to generate the estimate for me and load the bid in to the scatter plot and into the system here. And it's going to enable me to evaluate that bid. And there it is, 7 months, $1.4 million. There's a staffing profile. And it's going to let me provide the ability to look at different trade-offs, right? So for example, it's telling me 7 months, $1.4 million. Maybe I want to negotiate now with the vendor, right? 7 months, maybe it's not good, and maybe I need it done sooner. Well, and the vendor may say, hey, don't worry, we can add people, right? Or something like that. Or maybe we reduce the scope, or it lets us look at the different trade-offs and the impacts of adding people and reducing functionality, and what if we can work to a higher productivity, things like that. So it lets us look at trade-offs. It lets us do a deeper dive on the risk assessment. So for example, I can say, okay, 9 months, that's looking great, 99% chance. But if the vendor's trying to push, is promising me something in the 6 to 7 month range, only about a 10% shot. Same with cost, right? I can look at the 99%, $3 million versus the 10 to 20% chance of success down in here if I'm getting lowballed on a vendor bid. Okay, so it lets us look at trade-offs, lets us make decisions. It breaks the estimate out into more detail as well. So in addition to figuring out, 7 months, $1.4 million, it'll also break the estimate out at the skill level if I need that level of granularity. And all these views toggle to a report if I want to bring this out into Excel. So it lets me look at the trade-offs. It lets me make decisions. And if I have more detail going in, right, than what that bid evaluation wizard asked me for, I can certainly use it. So I could come in here, and if I have more detail, like on how this vendor allocates resources, if I have more detail on the sizing, so you can see here, I'm telling the vendor, I need this many screens and reports delivered and this many interfaces. Okay, let's take a little closer look at this for a second. You can see the component names here, screens, reports, interfaces, on the vendor delivery. This is part of the scope that we want delivered. You can see I want 81 screens delivered. That's what I'm hoping for. That's what the vendor's telling me. That's what we've agreed to. This many reports. Then you see in the center column, we have what we call implementation units per component. Okay, and these are called gearing factors, okay, or normalization factors. And it's one of the ways that we can use the data to get on the same page as the vendor, to make sure that the vendor and the customer are talking the same language as far as sizing. So usually sizing is one of the biggest challenges in vendor management. And how many times have you been in a situation where the vendor is talking a different language than you are on the deliverable? Okay, so these, and QSM has, remember, we have thousands of projects. We know what the typical gearing factors are for different size measures. We know what the typical number of implementation units is per component or per screen. We know what the typical number of story points per feature is. We know what the typical number of lines of code per function point is, just because we have all this industry data. So we can leverage those gearing factors to help you as the customer communicate more effectively with the vendor on the actual deliverable. And so we're leveraging these gearing factors in this historical data so that we can come to an agreement on whatever that deliverable is going to be. So in this example, we've actually broken the system out. We've decomposed it. And we've said, okay, we need 81 screens delivered. Each screen is equivalent to 125 implementation units. I've got 49 components or reports that I want delivered. Each report is equivalent to 296 implementation units. You might be thinking, okay, what's an implementation unit? In this example, it's the smallest unit of work. It's equivalent to a source line of code. Try to think of it that way. The smallest unit of work. That's how we're measuring. So we can get a feel for the complexity. That's what we're doing here. And you can see that the interfaces are much more complex than the reports and are much more complex than the screens. Okay, so that gives you a feel for it. So if we have a level of detail like this, we can certainly leverage it and put this into the SLIM tools as a sizing input. And then, of course, we put in what our productivity index is. And of course, we can say if we're really sure about it or not. We can use these uncertainty boundaries. We can use a range for the scope and the PI when we're running our estimates so that we can build plenty of buffer into the decision-making process with the vendor. Okay, so that just gives you a little idea of, so we can stay very high level when we're doing our vendor bid, or we can go very detailed if we have that level of detail from the vendor. And then, of course, we can evaluate the risk, and we can look at the trade-offs, and we can sanity check the estimate. Now, that's one example. Another example would be, this is more of an agile example, an agile scrum, okay? And you can see same architecture here. It's just a different template. You can see to my left, I've got the navigator that's got all the analytics that I need to evaluate the vendor bids. And I might have multiple vendor bids. You can see here that we're sanity checking again, right? So this is actually duration. This is this blue data point in this example is my bid for schedule or duration. And you can see I can feel comfortable with this because it's consistent with the industry average. And this is an agile project, so it's our most recent agile projects. That's what we're using here from the QSM database. And then we've got the triangles. That would be your historical data in that slim repository tool called the data manager, right? So now I can see, here's my bid. Is it consistent, right, with the historical data before I make a commitment and choose which vendor I would like. Now, take a closer look at this view here. This vendor's telling us we can deliver this in 10 sprints, 4.7 months at a $1 million cost. That's the bid. I've got a little risk snapshot here, a little risk gauge telling me that, because maybe I wanted the vendor to get done in 4 months, but it's telling me here that I've got less than a 5% chance of that happening. Much more likely they're going to be delivering in about 4.7 months. Okay. And then I can negotiate now, right? They're telling me 4 months, $1 million. All right. Well, what if I want more functionality? What's going to happen? How much will the cost go up and how much longer will it take? Right? These are some of the complexity factors that we help manage. So I can quickly assess the impact of that. So, what's it going to cost to add in that extra backlog and how much longer will it take? And when I hit OK, it updates the estimate now within seconds for that bigger scope, for that bigger functionality delivery, right? We can also negotiate things like the team size, the people, the delivery, how many resources are on the program. What's it going to cost? Will it help to add in that extra Scrum team? Right. And I can do that quickly as well. There's the bigger team. You can see it's still going to take, it's going to take over 13 sprints, about six months. And the cost is going to go way up when I add in that extra group of people, when I add the extra Scrum team in. But again, that's another example of a way that we can negotiate. We can look at the data. We can look at trade-offs pretty quickly. We can evaluate the risk. And it'll also break everything out for me in detail. It'll calculate the cost per sprint. Again, it toggles to reports. It'll calculate the velocity, fully support Agile, right? And then again, if we have more detail, we can certainly use it. So we're going to go into the sizing calculator again, and we can get this type of information. How many features, and we can break it out by different levels of complexity: small, average, large. I've got 8 small features, 4 average ones, 2 large features. That's how many components or features. And then I know the small features are about 4.6 stories per component. The average ones are a little more complex at 12, and the large features are even more complex at 36 stories per component. Now, remember, we have industry data that we can leverage, or you can use your own data to help come up with these gearing factors so that you can talk the same language as your vendor. Okay. So those are a couple examples. That's at the bid evaluation phase, right? That's very early in the decision-making process, right? And we have ways to manage that uncertainty, right? We can come in and, like, for example, this first estimate that I ran, 4.7 months, this can be my 50% solution right out of the box. If I get more data later, I can refine the estimate. But usually we're making very early decisions and we don't have a lot of information. We don't have enough information to do a detailed bottom-up plan for individual, how many hours is each person going to work? We're trying to get a scope. We're trying to get the targets right? So early on, maybe we don't have that luxury. We can come in now and just say, okay, let's do a contingency plan. Give me the schedule and the budget that I've got a 90% chance of achieving. So we can also use the SLIM models to help us figure out, what's reasonable and what's not. And here's a more conservative estimate, like I showed earlier, with a little more time and effort, right? That maybe we can feel more comfortable going into the program. So lots of ways to approach the decision-making process, lots of analytics that we can use. And we can help you with all this. Our support's all included, along with the training and all that stuff. So if you need help, we can certainly help you set this up. Now, bid evaluation process. We've chosen the vendor. Now we want to deal with the in-flight analysis, right? We've chosen the vendor. Now we want to make sure that everything goes well. Okay, and now we're looking at our SLIM control tool. You can see here, similar architecture as the estimating tool. We've got the navigator to our left. That's got all the analytics that help us manage the vendor process. You can see the dashboard here. We can see the Gantt chart. You can see the blue bar is our plan. That was our vendor bid initially from the vendor. The red is where the vendor is right now, okay, in time. You can see the features. You can see the defects, the staffing, the cost. Let's look at features for a second. This thin blue line that you see here was the vendor bid for the delivery of features. That was the plan. That was the estimate initially. And you can see that this vendor is getting in trouble. We've got the red data points on here. These are the actuals that we're capturing from the vendor. And you can see the actuals are falling off the plan. And so the yellow light's on telling us caution. Something's going wrong here. It's not right. So what we're doing is we are taking the actuals once a month and just the totals, not very labor intensive at all, just the totals, total people each month or every 2 weeks or whatever your cycle is, total features delivered, total defects found, if we want to track that. And we recommend that you do, right? It's not only good enough to get done on time, we want the system to work. So we want to be able to manage the defects. That we want that as a part of the contract. And then, any custom metrics you want to track, okay? Use cases, user component, design components, right? This could be 2 or 3 things you're tracking. It could be a dozen things, whatever you want. Bottom line is, though, we're taking the actuals once a month. You're seeing the plan versus the actuals. You're seeing here defects are skyrocket, a lot higher than the plan, right? This was the plan for defects, okay? The red light's on. They're finding a lot more defects than they had planned. You can see, the vendor should be, if you look in the top left, at about 136 defects, okay? They're finding 220. That's a problem. But the good thing is we're seeing it early in the process. And so we can try to react to it. Now, once we're into the program, we see these plans and actuals. Now we can run another estimate because we have more data, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to run a forecast right from here. And what this tool is going to do, it's going to curve fit to the actuals and run a new projection for us, okay? It's going to use that machine learning, those machine learning techniques, the historical data, the trend lines, and the models to forecast where this vendor is going to be based on all the changes that have occurred throughout the release, okay? And now we can actually see the new estimate, right? And so again, blue line there is the initial plan from the vendor. That's what we agreed to. Red is where the vendor is. Green is the new estimate. And it's validating what we just saw. This vendor is going to be late. You can see on the feature chart, they're going to deliver out in May or June. They were supposed to finish in December. Staffing and costs look okay, but it's not going to do us any good if the delivery is not there. Now, if we look to the bottom right, you can see we had planned on 508 features delivered. The vendor has only delivered 394. We had planned on spending $2 million. We've already overspent with this vendor. We're already up to about 2.2 million. The program's not even over. So what this tool is doing is it's taking the actual work delivered, the actual effort spent, and the actual duration that has elapsed, and it's recalculating this productivity index, right? Remember I told you how important that was? So even if your vendor doesn't know what a PI is, you're going to know. When they give you the time and the effort and the scope, you're going to know what their PI is in the plan. And now we can actually see what level they're working to. They're only achieving a 14.5. And we can use this information the next time. The next time we work with the vendor, if their bid is at a 16 level, we can remember, well, last time they only achieved a 14.5, right? So we can take all this into account and capture it for the next time we work with the vendor. And we can also use it to negotiate right now, right? So let's look at a couple trade-offs. What are we going to do about this? The vendor's late. Well, one of the things that we can try is adding people. Like that seems to be the fallback for a lot of programs. So 27 people, vendor says, hey, don't worry, we'll get it done. We're gonna add some extra people on. And then within a couple seconds, we can see the impact of that. So there's a new estimate right away. 27 people to 37. We save about 3 weeks and the cost skyrockets, almost $7 million, right? Probably not a great idea, but at least we know now. When I hit OK, you can see graphically now the impact of that. You can see that we're still going to be late. Vendor is still going to be late. Still going to deliver out in the March, April timeframe. Staffing costs go way up. You can see it graphically, right? So you can see the impact of adding people. This view right here might save you a ton of money and a ton of heartburn because you're seeing it early maybe not a good idea. Another trade-off might be, what if we reduce the scope? Can we live without those features till the next release? And we can drop the scope out and say, okay, and the impact of that, and you can see, okay, we're going to curve fit, we're going to run a new estimate within seconds. And there it is, new estimate with reduced scope. You can see we're almost on time there now. People and cost are under control again. You can see we're tying it up early, but this is part of the negotiating, right? It's part of the communication. Everybody's on the same page. All these reports are made available to the team, vendor and client side, and stakeholders. This is at the release level. Remember, I mentioned a lot of complexity on some of these programs. Well, we can also deal with that at the portfolio level. Master plan, I mentioned earlier, helps us support fully all of the vendor programs together in the big picture. So here we've got, and you can see in this example, this is actually a digital transformation example. You can see I've got multiple vendor bids in blue. When I highlight, you can see the proposed cost and schedule. And now we can deal with things like, okay, well, what if one vendor is late? How does that affect the start time of their next program? Or even more complicated, the other vendor's program? How do we deal with all that? Do we have the capacity to fulfill the demand? What are we going to do with those resources? Can we let this slip 2 or 3 more months? And how will that impact the overall portfolio cost? And you can see all these views here toggle to report, and you can see the total cost of the portfolio, all the bids, all the vendor bids together, $34 million, with the elapsed time, almost 14 months. So you can kind of look at the even bigger picture, look at the trade-offs, see how the slippage of one release affects the cost and effort of another, and helps us figure out, what decisions are we going to be making going forward to adjust to any changes. And then once the programs are over, we can capture that data. Remember, I mentioned capture a little bit of historical data. Here's an example. This is a software as a service program. This particular program or project or delivery was 722 stories, took 7 months, 6,700 person months of effort. Once we get those 3 measures, remember that software production equation, the Putnam model, we can calculate that PI. On this particular vendor was a 22.4. Now we're going to have this data the next time we work with a vendor, or the next time, even if it's a different vendor, we're going to see what's typical so that we can use it the next time to help hopefully manage more effectively going forward. And that concludes this example portion of the webinar. Happy to open it up for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Keith. That was great. Yeah, we already have a couple of questions, and since you were just showing data manager, one question was, what are the types of historical data? What measures do you need in the historical data?
Okay, so what we like to shoot for is just those core metrics. In fact, Larry Putnam Sr. wrote a book called 5 Core Metrics. And so what we try for is the scope, the duration, the effort, and then that productivity index. So we try to capture that data, keep it in the data manager. Now, that data manager is very robust. In fact, we use it for our industry database. You can go into as much detail and granular as you would like on the completed project or delivery metrics. But that basic information tab that I showed, basically size, time, and effort, so we can calculate that productivity index.
Okay, thank you. And another question is, what if you're working with a vendor for the first time? You wouldn't have any history, right? What do you do?
Great question. So what we recommend is try to make that part of the contract if you can. For a vendor to win your business, we need to have at least a few of their projects so we can see evidence of how they've done in the past. If you're not able to get that, then what we recommend is to leverage the trend lines in the QSM Slim tools, right? That, remember, we showed those examples where you can sanity check. You'll be able to see the typical industry numbers. In addition to that, leverage that productivity index, right? That's calculated based on historical data on typical projects. So if you can't get it from your vendor, then use the industry PIs that are built into the tools so that you can make some good decisions. And then take into account the uncertainty. If you're not using vendor data, take into account that you are using industry and include that in your estimate. Include that uncertainty so that when you generate the estimate, look at the 90% chance versus the 50% chance to help yourself, negotiate and feel more comfortable.
Okay, great. Thank you. And since you did mention the trend lines, another question was, what are the application types that we support?
So we support really any type of software or IT development process. Now, the trend lines that you saw are anywhere from, I'll name a few: real-time engineering, business applications. Uh, we have agile, we have financial, we have government. Really, any type of software development or IT development application domain. I think the ones that we showed were mostly, and also cloud migration trends as well. But anywhere from the engineering to the IT business world and anything in between. Process control is another one. Yeah, and so different flavors of the engineering world as well. Real-time embedded, avionics. Yeah, those are a few examples.
Yeah, and we
Also,
have package implementation too.
package implementations as well. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think you might have mentioned this, but does QSM offer some consulting in these areas?
Yes. So a lot of our clients, use the tools with our support, and then also some clients like to hire us to do all the legwork. And so we can do independent estimates for you. We can help you with we can be the independent source. We can do the bid evaluation for you. We can also do the in-flight analysis. So once you choose the vendor, we can help you do the oversight work. So we can run the tools for you as well.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions we have for today, and I think it's good to finish up so people can go ahead and go on to the next item on their agenda today. So thank you all for attending, and we will be making the recording available shortly. And thanks again for attending.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Laura. Appreciate it.